Hello, friends. We are now going to be starting Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Chapter 12, What It Said on the Golden Ticket. So we know that Charlie found a golden ticket in the last chapter. So now we are going to see what exactly happens when his family finds out. I asked you to make a prediction about that, so it might be a good time to remind yourself of what that prediction was. Okay. Charlie burst through the front door shouting, "Mother! Mother! Mother!" Mrs. Bucket was in the old grandparents' room serving them the evening soup. "Mother!" yelled Charlie, rushing in on them like a hurricane. "Look, I've got it! Look, Mother! Look! The last golden ticket! It's mine! I found some money in the street and I bought 2 candy bars and the second one had the golden ticket in there. Were crowds of people all around me wanting to see it, and the shopkeeper rescued me and I ran all the way home and here I am. It's the 5th golden ticket, Mother. I've got it. I've found it." Mrs. Bucket simply stood and stared, while the 4 old grandparents who were sitting up in bed balancing bowls of soup on their laps all dropped their spoons with a clatter and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds, there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then, very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You're pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You're having a little joke?" "I am not," cried Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then, very slowly, with a slow and marvelous grin spreading all over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The color was rushing to his cheeks and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy. And the center of each eye, right in the very center of the black pupil, a little spark of wild excitement was slowly dancing. Then the old man took a deep breath. And suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place inside of him. He threw up his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time, his long, bony body rose up out of the bed, and his bowl of soup went flying into the face of Grandma Josephine. And in one fantastic leap, the old fellow of 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of bed these last 20 years, jumped up the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pajamas. "Yippee!" he shouted. "3 cheers for Charlie! Hip, hip, hooray!" At this point, the door opened and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cold and tired, and he looked it. All day long, he had been shoveling snow in the streets. "Creepies," he said. "What's going on in here?" It didn't take them long to tell him what had happened. "I don't believe it," he said. "It's not possible." "Show him the ticket, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe, who was still dancing around the floor like a dervish in his striped pajamas. "Show your father the 5th and last golden ticket in the world." "Let me see it, Charlie," Mr. Bucket said, collapsing into a chair and holding out his hand. Charlie came forward with the precious document. Now, do you think that Mr. Bucket believes them at this point? I don't know. You might want to think about that. Let's see. It was a very beautiful thing, this golden ticket, having been made so it seemed from a sheet of pure gold hammered out almost to the thinness of paper. On one side of it, printed by some clever method in jet black letters, was the invitation itself from Mr. Wonka. "Read it out loud," said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into the bed again at last. "Let's all hear exactly what it says." Mr. Bucket held the lovely golden ticket up close to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly, and he seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths, then he cleared his throat and said, "All right, I'll read it. Here we go. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises await you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for 1 whole day. You and all the others who are lucky enough to find my golden tickets. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory, myself showing you everything that there is to see, and afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious eatables to last you and your entire household for many years. If at any time thereafter you should run out of supplies, you only have to come back to the factory and I'll show this golden ticket, and I shall be happy to refill your supply. In this way, you will be able to keep yourself supplied with tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting thing that will happen on the day of your visit. I am preparing other surprises. There are even more marvelous and more fantastic for you. And for all of my beloved golden ticket holders, mystic and marvelous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue, astonish, and perplex you beyond measure. Now, all those words that we kind of just went through there, they're all really trying to give this idea of amazement, excitement and amazement, shock. In your wildest dreams, you cannot imagine that such things could happen to you. Just wait and see. And now here are your instructions. The day I have chosen for the visit is the first day in the month of February. On this day and on no other, you must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late. And you are allowed to bring with you either one or two members of your own family to look after you and to ensure that you don't get into mischief. One more thing, be certain to have this ticket with you. Otherwise, you will not be admitted. Signed, Willy Wonka. The first day of February, cried Mrs. Bucket. But that's tomorrow. Today is the last day of January. I know it is. Cripes, said Mr. Bucket. I think you're right. You're just in time, shouted Grandpa Joe. There's not a moment to lose. You must start making preparations at once. Wash your hands, comb your hair, scrub your face, brush your teeth, blow your nose, cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and get all that mud off your pants. You must get ready, my boy. You must get ready for the biggest day of your life. Now, don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa, Mrs. Bucket said, and don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all try to keep very calm. Now, the first thing to decide is this. Who is going to go with Charlie to the factory? So I want you to take a moment to think about all the things that Roald Dahl, the author, does to show Grandpa's emotions here, Grandpa's feelings. There's a lot of feeling coming out of him. What exactly does he do to show that? I will, shouted Grandpa Joe, leaping out of the bed once again. I'll take him. I'll look after him. You leave it to me. Mrs. Bucket smiled at the old man. Then she turned to her husband and said, How about you, dear? Don't you think you ought to go? Well, Mr. Bucket said, pausing to think about it. No, I'm not sure that I should. But you must. There's no must about it, my dear, Mr. Bucket said gently. Mind you, I'd love to go. It'd be tremendously exciting. But on the other hand, I believe that the person who really deserves to go most of all is Grandpa Joe. He seems to know more about it than we do, provided, of course, that he feels well enough. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing around the room. He certainly seems well enough, Mrs. Bucket said, laughing. Yes, perhaps you're right after all. Perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one to go with him. I certainly can't go myself and leave the other three older people all alone in bed for a day. Hallelujah! Yelled Grandpa Joe. Praise, praise, praise! Oh, at that point, there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment there were newspaper and photographers pouring into the house. They had tracked down the finder of the fifth golden ticket, and now all they wanted was to get the full story. For several hours, there was complete pandemonium in the little house, and it must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them so that Charlie could go to bed. And that concludes chapter 12.